switching your OPAC from Sierra to TIND. That is something that we have just done over the summer, and we're into our, what month? 6th month?
Something like 8.
Yes. So it's quite a journey and a process, and we're going to talk you through it. We have here with us today Kathy McCarthy from TIND. She joined TIND in September of 2016. Previously, she was at Innovative Interfaces, so she's intimately familiar with both platforms, the one that we were on before and the one that we're on now. And I'm sure we'll get into things about switching away from a legacy system and reasons why you would want to do that, and how our new system is working, and what the whole transition process felt like. Along with Kathy, we have Chris Tarr, who is the head of our cataloging department. She has some deep experience in cataloging. She actually started at the main library in 1985, and that is significant because that is right when the Gladys system went into place, which was the precursor, right, of Melville, or?
Well, it was sort of a related.
Anyway, it was the first real technological push to get the catalog onto the computer. And she transitioned from the main library over to the law library in 1995, and she's been there since, learning every cataloging standard along the way. She and I and our web developer and a person who worked with TIND to build out the acquisitions module in TIND were the core team of people that made this transition happen. And so I'm going to bring Kathy to the podium for her part of our discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Ramona. Hi, everybody. As Ramona mentioned, my name is Kathy McCarthy, and I have been working with TIND now for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was at Innovative for almost 8 years, so yeah, I have a lot of experience working with both of those systems. I think it's kind of helpful just to give sort of a really brief overview of, many people, or some people haven't actually heard of TIND before. We are a relatively new company. So just to give a little bit of background about the technology that we're using. Then I'll talk more specifically about how the partnership with Berkeley Law sort of came to be, and then what the migration and implementation process was like from our perspective as a company, what our priorities were, and then I'll turn it over to Chris to talk more about sort of the details about what it's been like to work with the system and some of the differences between working with a more legacy system like Sierra versus TIND. So TIND is using a technology that actually was originally developed by CERN in Geneva. So CERN is a really interesting organization. If you're familiar with it at all, there have been some pretty exciting things that have happened at CERN over the years. It is the site of the Large Hadron Particle Collider, which is the largest machine ever built by mankind. It's also where the World Wide Web was invented back in 1994 by Tim Berners-Lee, not Al Gore, as some people would say. But CERN has a traditional library. They also produce lots and lots of other types of content there. They have a really large document server. They host about 12,500 researchers per year that create lots and lots of original scholarly publications. Their library there has all of the sort of traditional collections that a library would have, though, so monographs, ebooks, serials, journals. But then in addition to all of that traditional, which really isn't that traditional. Most libraries are like this. You have your library collection, but then you also have a lot of unique things that your institution produces. CERN is maybe somewhat unique just in terms of the sheer volume of some of those things. But lots of theses, articles, books, dissertations coming out of there from their researchers. They also have lots of digital assets, both born digital and digitized historic images, and then really massive quantities of raw data. So the Hadron Collider itself produces a petabyte of data per year. So they had originally sort of designed this platform not just with the core functionality of the ILS in mind, but as sort of the goal to provide a more flexible framework that could be used to manage lots of these types of collections in a single instance of the software. So CERN had been using this open source based platform for a while. Other libraries outside of the CERN community started to become interested in the capabilities of the platform and it just being a more modern architecture. So TIND was formed as an official CERN spinoff in 2013 to start to provide managed services and development on top of that open source layer. So we provide software as a service. That means hosting, we do support, we provide updates, maintenance of backups. We do a lot of migration assistance, so there's not nearly the same level of technical heavy lifting involved with migrations, configuring the original instance of the platform, and then doing lots and lots of development on top of that. So as of 2017, we had been working with a number of academic and special libraries, primarily in Western Europe and a few in the US. We had sort of started to kind of make a little bit of headway there. So Caltech signed on and migrated from Millennium to the TIND ILS back in like 2014 or 2015. But they really were kind of the flagship US library that had started to use the platform. And then we had a number of, a few more US institutions that were using some of the other digital asset management components of the platform, like they would have an IR or a digital archive. So in TIND, we've basically split this platform layer into 4 different products. So there's the ILS, there's the IR, there's digital archive, and then there's research data management. And an important sort of thing to note about the way that we're organized is that, each of these 4 components can be fully functional as a standalone. We have libraries that use just one of these products. For instance, UC Berkeley Law is a great example. They're just using the ILS right now. We also, though, have lots of libraries, and this is sort of a unique capability of the platform, where you can actually use it to manage more than one collection in a single instance. So for instance, we have libraries that will have University of Chicago, for instance. They have an IR and a digital archive. They have a research data repository and an institutional repository combined. The UN headquarters in New York, they use it as an IR and a DA combined. So you can sort of mix and match depending upon what type of content that you'd like to manage. The platform just has sort of different functionality that you enable depending on what you need to visualize and what you need to contain within it. So as of 2017, the ILS component of the system was fairly well developed. As you can see, we had most of the main modules. We had OPAC and circulation and cataloging, global updates, self-check, statistics, things like that. But sort of a glaringly obvious missing piece here was acquisitions and serials. There was really almost no acquisitions or serials functionality in the system, just some really simple kind of manual workflows. So we pretty quickly, I especially pretty quickly, when arriving at the company, realized that this was going to be a pretty big barrier to us really making much headway in the ILS market, especially in the US, and that we really needed to partner with a library or some libraries that would be willing to collaborate with us and really participate heavily in the development of these pieces of the system. And along came Berkeley Law. I had, some experience, working with them from working at Innovative, but it definitely wasn't a, you're our best friend, like, yes, come on over. So we were really excited. They agreed to collaborate with us to migrate from the Sierra system and to also help us really understand their existing acquisitions and serials workflows, and then to use that to build out these components of the system, which was a huge risk on their part, and we've really been extremely grateful for all of the faith in us that they've shown and just the attitude that they approach the project with. It really wouldn't have been possible without such a dedicated and enthusiastic partner to help us with this. So we had pretty big plans. The migration process was planned out to take place over the course of a year. So we needed lots of time for doing a lot of the development, for sort of understanding their existing workflows and really starting to figure out what was absolutely necessary, sort of day one go live, what things could sort of wait until a little bit later in the process, and then do all the planning for how we were going to build in these really large and very integral pieces of the system into the architecture that already existed in the platform that we had. So there were many phases in the development sort of over the course of these 4 quarters, with lots of development and then sort of iterative testing and feedback to try to, tweak things and figure out with the test system that they had, would these workflows actually work, and to be able to play around with them and figure out how they would need to be adjusted. But the stakes were really high for both parties. I know that a lot of people were sort of watching and paying attention, wanting to see, was this actually going to work, or was it going to crash and burn? And we really understood that we had to kind of be all hands on deck in order to make sure that the process went smoothly, and that the platform was something that they could work with and be really happy with and excited about moving forward. So I think, comparing this to sort of a standard migration, although there really are no migrations that are that standard. They're all sort of slightly unique in their own way. We had some definite special priorities in terms of this project and things that we knew that we would need to really pay attention to and focus on. So we wanted to really be able to understand how they used the system previously, what were their workflows, what was the functionality that was really, really integral, and what were things that maybe they were doing that they didn't have to do, or that could be simplified and streamlined in TIND. So part of that was to then sort of create a list of the individual development items and then work through them with Berkeley Law staff to figure out how to prioritize those development items and then how to plan for them in a timeline fashion so that we could make sure that the roadmap was sort of progressing on schedule and that things were getting done. So a lot of it was stuff that needed to be fully functional day one in order for this to be considered a success. Of course, any migration, especially one in which the library has been using their existing system or had been using that company's systems for 35 years. I think Berkeley Law was one of the first innovative customers using the Innovac system back in 1987.
Sounds right.
There was a lot of needing to manage expectations and work with staff to really make sure that there was buy-in for the project and that people understood that even though this was a really big change, that it was going to be positive, that we were there, we were going to really be working as hard as possible to make sure that it went smoothly. And just making sure that everybody kind of felt good about it and felt like we were, paying attention to them and listening to them and really trying to make sure that it was going to be successful. And then, of course, a lot of the sort of like configuration and implementation decisions. With any migration, there's just a lot of data and system decisions that you need to make. You're using these very complex systems. A lot of the times there are decisions that were made maybe many, many years ago. You need to decide, do you want to sort of scrap the way that you used to do it before and create, an entirely new location code structure or new patron types, or do you want to sort of migrate things over as much as possible? So there was a lot of that sort of back and forth communicating and trying to sort of think out, why is it done this way? Could it be slightly better? And then how do we actually implement that in the new system? So in terms of understanding the existing workflows, before the decision was actually even made to migrate to TIND, one of the things that we did was go to Berkeley Law and spend a lot of time just watching Joaquin specifically, who's the head of acquisitions and serials, just do his work. So, he was instrumental just in being really patient and kind of just walking us through everything to make sure that we really understood, like, what on a day-to-day basis are you doing? How do you do it now? Not just how do you do it, but why do you do it that way, which oftentimes is a more difficult question to answer than you may think, especially when the technology itself has been sort of iteratively developed in a way over such a long time period, like a system like Sierra, where a lot of the time the way that your workflows are created is really sort of more dictated by the technology itself than by what you actually need to accomplish with that workflow. So part of that process too was really challenging some of the existing assumptions within the library, and there were certainly some lively conversations that we had about, well, why do you do it this way? Do you really have to do it this way? Is there maybe this way that you could do it better? And sometimes there were, and sometimes there weren't. Sometimes it really was, it needs to be done this way. But there was a lot of discussion and kind of going through and working through those issues and deciding how we were going to implement that in the new system. So in terms of the particular challenges with this migration, I mean, really the main challenge was just the sheer scale of development that needed to be done. There were moments when I was very nervous and was frankly amazed that it all did come together and that we were able to build really from the ground up these two really large integral components of the system that I think law libraries in general tend to be very heavy users of acquisitions and serials. But yeah, so just the sort of time management and working with this timeline and really just being able to actually develop everything that needed to be done was probably the biggest challenge. And I don't really anticipate that there would be that much development for another migration anytime too soon. The other really big challenge, again, as I mentioned, is that there was 35 years of data to migrate. If you think about the way that you were doing your job 35 years ago, it's pretty different than the way that you're doing it today. And if you are working with the same company where you're sort of, maybe you've gone through this process of upgrading to that company's version of the new platform, you still are sort of mostly carrying all of that those previous decisions and that previous configurations with you. The decisions that you've made about how the library works and how your metadata is compiled and where you're putting notes for things into the system. So there was a lot of stuff like all over the place in there. I mean, note fields that had been used for 20 years that, or like codes that maybe weren't really applicable anymore, but we weren't sort of sure, like, well, what is this code used for? And like, do you remember what this was, why you did it that way in the beginning? But amazingly, we were really able to migrate all of the data. I mean, some of it was a question of sort of profiling new fields to store those things in, or creating new fields in the records in order to make sure that information was accessible in some way. But I think that the sort of underlying flexibility that the TIND ILS has made that process much more simple maybe than it would have been, just because it's very easy to query the database and all of the different elements that are within the records. So that was mitigated partly by technology, and then also just partly by making sure that we had a good understanding of how the system was being used and what needed to be accessible in the new one. Another challenge, which I sort of touched on briefly, a lot of the workflows in most libraries, I mean, I think in previous years, a library would typically stay with an ILS provider for 10 plus years. That time frame is becoming shorter and shorter over time, but there are still many libraries that have been using their ILS for 15, 20, 25 years. And a lot of those workflows that they're using today are based on iterative processes that began many, many years ago when things were very different. So that also was particularly challenging, just in the sense that some of the workflows were really complex and sort of seemed kind of over-engineered. So it was really a process of trying to figure out how to simplify from within that structure. Berkeley Law, I don't know if it's more so than other law libraries, but I think just by virtue of the fact that they participate in a broader campus organization, UC Berkeley, the authentication structure was a bit complex, and we had some things to work through in terms of single sign-on, and kind of just mostly I think some of that issue was in working with the main campus and just getting sort of the flow of information that we needed, which at times was a little slow. And it was especially sort of time sensitive with the migration date coming up, where we're like, we need to make sure that single sign-on is working so that patrons can authenticate day one. But then really the other challenge, and I think that this is true really for any library, you're used to working with the system that you have, and there are certain habits and ways that you do things that are just hard to sort of get out on. But I think especially in this case, we were just really lucky that Berkeley really approached the project with the exact kind of attitude that we really look for in our partners, which is sort of an openness to want to understand maybe new ways of doing things, and to be willing to look at different ways of accomplishing the same goal, and being just sort of open-minded and positive and enthusiastic about the process. So their launch party was July 10th of 2017. We had some cake and some champagne, and it was nice. And then the go live was August 1st of 2018. So they've been using the system now for 8 months. I think we still have, we spent a lot of time there. I think towards the end, it was almost like they were considering just setting up a cot for us underneath the conference table in the main room. But we still, I think, have bi-monthly meetings sort of to talk about issues that are ongoing and things that are still needing to be tweaked. And there always are things, but to our minds, it's been very successful. They've been a great partner to work with, and certainly we really appreciate the faith that they took in us in taking this huge leap. So I will turn it over to Chris now to kind of talk about more of the details, and she can tell you what really happened from her perspective.
I'm going to try an experiment, which is to try.
You can just.
So I'm Chris Tarr. I'm the head of cataloging at Berkeley Law. And this is my fancy slide. Why did we choose TIND? We wanted something that was going to be modern. We wanted something that was going to be cheaper. And we wanted a system that was going to be more responsive than Innovative had become over time. So we went with TIND. Can you see that? Maybe I'll just go with this, because otherwise I'm going to have to sign in. Right. Okay, so hold on, now I need my notes. Okay, so as Kathy said, the migration actually went pretty well. Joaquin worked really hard and Mike Lindsay, our web guy, they worked really hard to get all of our data out of Sierra. And I think one thing that you don't realize is that you're using a system and maybe it doesn't do the thing you want it to do. So you figure out another way of making it do that. So we had stuff stuffed in Sierra that was not really standard, but it was working. And the challenge was like, oh, where does that really belong? Where should it and some stuff is just like stored in marked fields in case we ever figure out why we need it. But that was part of it, is just that the things you're doing are not always completely standard, and then you're moving to another system and you've got to figure out how to make that all work. But basically it worked really well, and as Kathy said, most of the team came and lived in our conference room for at least a week, if not longer, and we still talked out at least once a month, I can't remember, anyway. So they were as responsive as we had hoped. So here's kind of an overview of the catalog. The top banner is kind of actions people can take. There's a single search box. Below are various collections, which I'm going to talk about. And then along the bottom, it's probably hard to see, but there are links out to the law library, the law school, UC Berkeley campus, and the UC Berkeley library. generally. And so this right here is personalized. You go here to renew your books, figure out what books you've got checked out, look at your basket, which I'll go into. The next one, this is really, I'm signed in, and so I'm a staff member. And so this is really where all the staff stuff takes place. The admin center is where you can see if a record that you passed from OCLC really made it there. Batch editors to edit batches of records, batch uploader to upload lots of records, circulation, Ramona can fix the loan rules, collections, I'll explain more about that later, global list to sort of fix up item records. So all the sort of stuff that we do is there. Library home just links out to the library home page. Law databases goes to the databases homepage. How do I? I don't know. I've never looked at that.
It's very useful.
Huh? Is it useful?
Well, people ask all sorts of questions like, how do I renew my books, and how do I find out what's on course reserve, and how do I find non-law databases? And I don't do that. Edna does that, but yeah, it's useful.
Good. And then we sort of, I mean, this is really the catalog, but this contact us, but we've also got like the link to the chat reference and the phone number, I guess that belongs there, but in a certain sense, it's almost working kind of like the library homepage in that it's got links to other, it feels more homepagey than just a catalog. So that stuff seemed appropriate to be there. Let's go back. So this is the homepage. There's notice the single search box, which seems really cool until you think about how do I look for a title? And so what you do is you enter things in the single search box, and this is what it looks like when you do. A bunch of records comes up, and on the left side there are some facets, which are actually really helpful. And that was kind of a new thing. You didn't have them. I think we made them develop those facets, and they're good. They're useful. Here is like a record for a single book. It doesn't, and the weird thing is that the staff view and the patron view are the same. So we're both looking at that, and to me, as a cataloger, I'm like, that's not very helpful to me at all, but okay. But then the toolbar it's got things like edit, bib, I add item record, so add another copy, add this to my list of things I'm saving, create an order. And it also, if you look at the formats, these are the different formats. I'll read them to you. Bib text, mark, mark XML, Dublin Core, EndNote, XML, and RefWorks. Ramona, do you ever use any of those? Yeah, I use the mark XML, which looks like this, which looks like a record that I actually can understand. And then this is if you're going to edit the record, which is, I know this is really tiny, but it's a little bit clunky. To edit a bib, a mark field, each subfield has its own line. I sort of think this might be what bibframe is going to look like, but anyway. And so that's kind of the back of it. Here is a holdings record, which is a sort of what used to be the check-in card. It gives information about frequency, it gives the call number, any notes that we have, how it's going to get bound. Not that we bind anything anymore, if things have arrived or not. So this is kind of the check-in card. But then to go back to what the public sees, so here's some of the advantages of TIND. So, and I talked to our web guy about this, and he sort of confirmed my feelings. I mean, I think that Sierra was sort of a tank, and TIND is kind of like a Toyota. It's like Sierra had all these very rigid tasks that it could do, and TIND can do them too, and it's a lot more flexible about how it does them, but it sometimes you have to kind of jerry-rig how things work, or just figure out a new way of doing it. So Mike Lindsay was saying that it's a new system, and it sort of takes advantage of cloud-based computing, so it has version control. If you change a record, you can go back and see previous iterations of the record, and that's really helpful. It also has easy ways to download things into an Excel spreadsheet, or just stuff like that you're sort of used to being able to do on the web, and you could do them in Sierra, but it was a very long and convoluted and difficult process. And so those are some of the things you gain by having this new modern system. But then there are also sort of things that you lose, which I will also explain. Let's see. So the first thing I want to look at is the collections. And you see that group of, which you can't read, but it says narrow by collection, and one of them that I'm going to look at is faculty authors. So it's super easy to make a collection of all the books that our faculty authors have written, which they love. They love having this. And suppose you were, this could be a real life situation. Suppose you were having a puffery palooza and you had to find all the books in 2018 that your faculty had written so that you could have a party and invite them and display their books. So you could go into this faculty authors collection, and you could use one of the facets to limit it by 2018. And I don't know if you can see it, but down on the right-hand side it says export as Excel. So super easy. You type in the mark fields that you want displayed in your spreadsheet, and I realize not only is this easy for staff, but patrons could do this as well if they knew what the mark tags were. I don't know if they do or not.
I highly doubt it.
They could learn them.
I had to learn them, Chris.
But it was worth it, right? But anyway, so you do this, and then you got your Excel spreadsheet, and it's fantastic. It's like that was so easy. It didn't require going into lists and remembering what you have to put in between each field so that it will break up into an Excel spreadsheet thingaroo. So that was great. Another example of sort of like ease of use and flexibility is that we have this, is the use of baskets. So we have this staff group, the staff circle on something or other, and they have like a reading list. I don't know what are they doing?
I don't know. I think that they meet monthly and they discuss issues around racism and things along those lines. And
Yes, I
so
think
then
that's
they went to you and asked for you to gather up some books on those topics, yeah?
Right, they wanted to have an easy way for me to put all together all these books. And some of them are in our popular reading collection, and some of them are in the stacks with a completely, like with real call numbers. So they were spread all over the place, but it was great. So what I did is I made this Staff Circle Recommends collection. So what happened is that Nancy and Tricia, looked through the catalog and they decided which books they wanted to add to their collection. And so if this was one of them, and it is, they could click on the Add to List, which puts it in a basket, whatever a basket is. And then she took her basket and she shared it with me. So then I had her basket. And then I went through her basket and I added a little code to each one to put them in the Staff Circle Recommends collection. And there they are. And it's so easy. I didn't have to touch the books. I didn't have to relabel them. I didn't have to move them to a different special place. It was really easy, and it made the staff really happy. So that's another really good example of what you can do with a new modern system. And the other thing is, it turned out that we could actually use these collections for staff use. So we used to have a mechanism to count. We get certain books on monographic series orders, and Joaquin liked to count them. I don't know why. And in Sierra, there was some way that he counted them, and TIND did not have the same thing. So we thought, well, how are we going to count them? So I said, why don't we put them in a collection? So we did. So now we just add this code, CAS for CADASEPS, to all these records, and then he can look up that collection and use the facets to find the year. And so it was a really good answer to a thing that in Sierra had some hardwired way of doing this. TIND didn't, but you could figure out how to do it using this collection mechanism. And this is not a public collection. We know how to find this. We search for field 980, CAS, and we find them, but the public doesn't ever see that this is going on. That's another, I'm going to get into searching in a minute, but the one really cool thing about TIND for the back end is that you can search by anything. We can search by any MARC field, we can search by any MARC subfield, we can search by any, like in the header, any subfield. So for instance, some of our collections here, for instance, e-resources, that's looking for is it 338, the one that says online resource? And serials is looking for S in the header. That's all you have to do. Just tell it, look for that thing. So it's like finally we're able to make use of all these things we've been putting in MARC records for the past 30 years in the hope that some system will eventually be able to make use of them. I know, it's kind of great. Let's see, but anyway, this one single search thing, it kind of has good points and bad points. Because as librarians, we really want to look by to look by tags or by, I'm forgetting the word. We want to look up title. We want to browse. We want browse indexes. We want to look by title. We want to look by author. We want to look by call number. And you see that these things are not there. You can put them in. You can say, own I know, colon, and the call number, and get back. But you soon realize you don't actually have to. You just type in the call number. You could also type in call number. There's a couple index names, which I don't even know because I don't use them now.
Well, there's a little circle with an I in it. I think that you can use anyway. This is all very new to all of us, and
Right.
and
But
it's
do you
taking
ever
a
do
little
that?
bit of. I know that I've used the title and the author. I don't, and I haven't used the tag for the call number thing.
Yeah.
But then the
I find that
facets afterwards are
I
good.
find that I don't use it. I've just given up and used the keyword, and it actually works pretty well. So the downside is there's not easy index browsing. The upside is the searching works pretty well. But for things like call numbers, where if you're a cataloger, you might want to be shelf listing things. If I search by call number, I type that call number in. What do I get? I get back the 2 books that have that call number. I don't know what's earlier. I don't know what's later. It's not easy. I mean, there are ways around it, and you sort of figure out what you need to do and what you don't need to do. I could make it shorter. I could make it display only the call numbers. All those things are handy, but you kind of have to get used to the fact that there isn't an index browse. And so if you're doing a title search and you put in the title, like this Modern Admiralty Law, this is what I get back. I do get back the book that is titled Modern Admiralty Law, but I get these other things too because they're relevant. So this used to really bug me, and it doesn't really bug me anymore. I've sort of gotten used to it.
Getting over it.
But here's another example. This is the record number. Why am I getting 4 things back with the record number? Well, because maybe that number occurs in the ISBN or somewhere else. It's, any number of reasons, but they're all coming back. But the one that I want, which actually is weirdly the second one in this case, also came back, so it's fine. So overall, I would say, I was talking to Mike, and it's like, there's kind of this, as librarians, we think we know what we're doing, and we've been doing it a long time, and so we're pretty sure we know what we're doing. But then there's this new paradigm, and things are very different, and you realize that you can kind of, so the thing you come down to is like, what things do I really need? And what things can I guess I don't really need that after all. I can kind of live without it. And index browse was one that we were pretty sure we really needed. And Alex was pretty sure that we didn't need it. And
Alex is the CEO, by the way.
and he kept saying things like, but that's not how people search. And it's like, that's how we search. We're people. We need that. We need that to do our job. And luckily there were enough of us, and I think also new libraries coming on also demanded it, perhaps egged on by us to told them, demand this because we really want it. So they are going to be developing index browse. And here's another example that just happened today. you probably can't see this, but the blue line, it says Gregory 1, Pope, approximately 540 to 604. So that's the name heading, right? And as a librarian, you know that people have headings and they're unique. That's the point of the heading, that it's a unique heading that pulls up all the books by that person and none of the books that aren't by that person. And I don't think TIND understood that, because when we first got the system, it was only indexing the first subfield of the name heading. It was only indexing Gregory. So you would find this book by Gregory the First, and you would click on the name, and you would get like Saint Gregory, Gregory the 16th. It was shocking and horrible. And we complained about it for a long time. And I kept bringing it up. It's like, but the names, I just can't, it's supposed to be an exact thing where I click on this and I get only the books about or by Gregory and none of the books that are not by Gregory. And they finally today fixed it. So certain things, I'm sure not at all inspired by my giving this talk. But I mean, I think that's kind of it. You have to sort of figure out, like, well, what things, maybe I don't really need to be able to count the number of monographic series, monographs that are coming in, because I can do it with some other thing and that works. But some things, as a librarian, because this really isn't a system designed by librarians. It's really a database, kind of adapted for our use. So I think it's important for us to push back on things that we as librarians really know that we need, and also to be flexible and say, well, we can just figure out the number of cataceps by doing this other thing. That's fine. So that's my spiel. And now we have time for questions.
Yes, please. We have 15 more minutes. Chris, come back over here.
I'm coming.
And if you guys want to ask questions, please do. I will try to repeat the question so that it will come out on the video, and we'll just have a discussion. Donna.
I'm sorry, I was late. I didn't get to hear. Did all the libraries in Berkeley do all
No.
Just
No.
Has that impacted them?
No, we've always had our own separate catalog. Can you hear this? We've always had our own catalog. We've always been separate. So that made our life easier, and that we were able to choose this system, and we didn't have to worry about what they were doing.
We are doing a big digital archive project with the main campus, though. So we have a relationship with them as well, but they use a Millennium system and have their own instance of it over there.
I'm sorry. I promised I was going to repeat the question, and then I just didn't do it. So Law has a separate catalog from the rest of the campus, and we were the only one that changed.
I know that Berkeley's a big digital commons customer for your IR.
Oh.
Your journals are presently hosted there. Now that you've adopted TIND as your ILS, are you considering adopting TIND as your IR?
Oh, that's such a good question. So the question is about institutional repositories. Berkeley Law uses Digital Commons for our scholarly works collection, and that's entirely Joe Sarah's bailiwick, and I don't really know. Do you know?
I think they're
Terrific.
I think they're thinking about it. I think they haven't made any decisions, but I think they're thinking about it. Is that what you think too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other places moving from digital commons?
Oh, so the question is anyone else considering moving from Digital Commons to TIND IR?
Kathy would know.
We've done bpress migrations before, yeah. I think Millersville University in Pennsylvania migrated from Content DM and bpress to a TIND IR DA instance.
Stephen, let me ask Stephen.
You said you've done a migration from digital commons, so we wouldn't have to, if we did make a switch like that, we wouldn't have to re-upload all of our content again.
Okay, so the question is a migration from Digital Commons to TIND IR is doable.
I mean, in the same, no, not in this, no, we do the migration process for you, so the existing data would be migrated into the TIND IR platform, the same way that we do with an ILS.
Okay.
As long as you can get the data out, we can ingest it in batch into the new system.
So Stephen has a question.
Yes, I was just wondering with the migration, how hard it was to go from previous mark fields into RDA, or how you handled that. Because a lot of the fields keep
Hold on. I'm going to repeat the
Go
question.
repeat the question.
So the question is about how easy is it to migrate with MARC fields changing and new standards like RDA and things like that?
So in the old ILS, we had things in ACR2 and things in RDA, and they lived happily next to each other. And the same was true of TIND. But then after we moved, we sent everything off to Marchive, and they RDA-ified everything, which is great, because it now means that when you look for like the 348, all the records have it, not just the most recent ones. So.
I know that with Sierra, I'm sure you use a lot of lists to do your own quality control.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Okay, sorry. The question is about lists and how does that functionality work in TIND?
We were very skeptical of this because we had all these lists, right? I mean, you could just run them again and again. And we said, well, what will happen? And Kenneth said, well, just you can save the URL. You can say that you can do the search and save the URL and just do it over and over again. And essentially, that's true. It's so easy. You don't need to save those lists. You can just do the same search again and again and again. We were even thinking we could keep like bookmarks. We could keep a list of bookmarks of all the searches we wanted to, and that would work. But we sort of haven't needed to. So.
And a follow-up on that, the lists were always useful for global updates. How do global updates work?
Global
Okay.
updates.
Yes, global updates. How does that work?
Global update. Well, you can do batch editing. There's a slight problem, which is that you can't look things up by a bib number and change something in an item record, or you can't look things up by item record and change them in the bib record. Is that true?
So there's a global update module that allows you to do batch updates of all of the other types of records in the system aside from bibs. You can do batch edit of bibs using a different tool called the batch editor.
Batch editor. Yeah.
Right now you can only, like, the record types are segmented. So she's right. You can't look up like a vendor record number and batch change fund codes. But that development is coming in the next 6 months that we're doing in partnership with another library that's coming on. The other thing that I wanted to mention about your previous question about, what is it called? Global lists. Is you end up using the OPAC itself as a way to do those types of record queries. Chris mentioned that you can do queries on MARC tags and subfields. You can do index heading tags, so author, Chemerinsky, or title, whatever. But then you also can pull in metadata from outside of the bib records using the OPAC. So you can do searches on things like item count or item status or location code. So you can sort of use the OPAC as the way to query those sets of records and then export it into Excel or save the URL, because it will save all of your search terms within the URL for you.
You can actually search in the OPAC, let's say, a location in an item record and a location in a bib record.
There are no locations in bib records.
Yeah.
They're only in the item record.
Well,
Yeah.
in your library.
No, that's the way it is. Which I agree is odd, but it actually is okay. But yeah, there is a record batch editor thing which edits bib records easily, and also global lists which can update item records. Yeah.
Did your question get answered? Okay.
So I'm looking for a specific example where you had to get people to leave behind the way that it was and focus on the task that needed to be achieved, not the way it used to be, how painful it was, and what was the end result, what was the savings, what was the
Okay. So the question is about the bottom line that change is hard and old habits don't die. So what is a specific example of something that was done in the old system that it was hard to come up with a solution for in TIND? No? Sorry, I didn't understand it.
hard it was to get people to
To do the new thing.
from the way it used to be?
Uh-huh.
and they were trying to figure out what are they gonna list.
Do you,
Getting staff buy-in.
yeah, I've got a
Uh-huh.
couple examples. You may have one as well.
I thought of one too.
Okay. So for one thing, we used to we would catalog in OCLC and we would add the item record in OCLC and pass the whole thing. It turns out that doesn't work in TIND because when you order a record, you have to create an item record at the same time. So what you need to do then is pass the bib record and then go in and edit that item record that was already created. So it's just a different process, and arguably it's probably a little bit more clicking around. The other system might have been a little. So people were unhappy about it, but I think everyone's used to it now. And the good thing is, while you're in TIND, so you pass the record and then you have to go into TIND and you have to change the item record to add the barcode and say it's not on order, it's actually in the stacks. But the nice thing is then you can actually also print a label. So the thing that caused people to sort of buy in was the fact that, oh, we can print a label and then we don't have to, then it's much easier to get the books labeled. So another example was the serials people, it was much harder for them. I think just because they do very specific tasks and they do them over and over again and they really don't like change. So adjusting from the check-in record to this new thing of adding essentially item records, I think when the thing gets checked in, really Kathy did not like that at all. And she really didn't like the fact that there was no way of predicting. She couldn't tell anymore if something didn't come in. And I think the truth was she was right. It was a problem. And I think Joaquin and I think they're fixing it. They're working on that. So, I mean, she really did uncover something that really wasn't going to work. So that maybe that made her feel better because she felt like she had some influence on the final product.
Different Kathy.
Yeah, not this Kathy,
right.
a different Kathy.
Do you have another example?
Well, I was thinking about when we first went and were sort of looking at all of the serials processing workflows, Joaquin had this incredible system of all of these colored flags that would go in the books, and they would have all these different steps on. I mean, it was really intense.
The yellow flag.
Yeah, different color-coded tags that meant different things, and I would go to these people, but the flag sort of would always stay with the book. And where we were kind of well, why don't we just barcode everything, and then you can just use then you don't have to have these pieces of paper, and then it will just, the tasks associated with the record will be kind of in the record, and you'll be able to see it when you scan it.
I think we've still got the flags.
Old habits die hard.
Well, I think I think the reasoning behind that is that it's my impression that barcoding every single item takes more time than those flags.
Okay.
Honestly,
I think the problem is, I think we are barcoding everything, but the problem is with the flag, you can tell without even looking at the record what's going on with that book. So it is in some instances that's actually helpful.
David.
Curious, now that you've moved to this leading edge ILS, are there things that have surprised you in terms of things that were possible before that are now possible that you didn't even think about in terms of services to faculty or student or journals?
Oh,
Okay, so is there something that we have discovered in the new system that we just didn't even know was a possibility? There's something that surprised us? Yeah, that's me.
What about sending? My impression is that you can send messages to people who've checked out books or faculty more easily.
Oh, well, that isn't something that I didn't know was possible. That was something that I was wanting to do for a long time. In Sierra, it was, for some bizarre reason, really hard to pull together a list of items that are checked out to a particular person to be able to send it to them. And I wanted to do that particularly for the faculty because we treat them like they don't have to do ever anything, so they don't know what they have checked out to them. It was seemingly impossible in Sierra. I never figured it out. And it's much easier in TIND. You can, in the global list function, you can pull up a list of patrons. So I could just query the database for every patron who's a faculty member, and I could send an email out to each one of them and say, this is the list of the items you have checked out. And I would insert the token that's called items on loan. And then that creates an email that goes out to all of them, just like that.
I think also like just
Oh, getting the books back is a whole other story, Chuck. You know.
it's not gonna happen.
I just want them to know. I've had to pry some books back from Julie, actually.
I think also it turns out that our item types and our loan rules in Sierra were a mess, and I think it's because we didn't set them up right 35 years ago, and it got worse.
Oh, and I can address that. That was like my huge pain point. The loan rules are based on three things. They're based on the patron type, the item type, and the location. Number one, we have had many locations become no longer existing in the building. We've had new patron types added that are becoming more and more difficult to quantify, like we have these hybrid LLM people that are only in residence for a short time and they're online for other times. And and in Sierra, those data points, I don't know what to call them, are all kind of in a list, and each line that these things are on has a number, and if you delete one, then everything moves up and the numbers change, and it only refers to a number in the code, so you can't delete anything. And so what ended up, when I was looking at, I just became the circulation librarian maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I had to try and figure out how this whole circulation thing worked, and I took a look at what the underlying programming was behind the loan rules, and it made my head explode.
It didn't make any. It did not make any sense.
So,
So just moving to anything was an excuse to make something.
lots
to
of
redo
changes to make the patron types. The item types is the thing that was illogical, because the item types were things like 4-hour loan. That's a loan rule. That's not an item type.
In
So,
order to make it work, we had jerry-rigged all kinds of stuff and put stuff in the wrong category.
and I believe now pull up the stuff on the screen and show you how our loan rules work instead of going, I don't know.
But in a way, I think that's just an argument for migrating more often than once every 35 years, because you uncover terrible things that you can fix.
Well, I think it was also an issue of a legacy system that was very hard to modify. Like, I think if we wanted to change something in TIND, it could very much more easily be changed at this point. Because and you can take there's a whole table of the loan rule selection table, and you can order it by different. It's just like an Excel spreadsheet. You can order it by this column or that column, and you can put these things together and those things. You couldn't do that before. You had to look at this pages long list. Oh my gosh! So that's my thing.
Sorry, I have one more question on the single search box. Did you use a lot of subject searches before, and how is that working now?
Oh, sorry. The question is about, did you used to do, how does subject searching work with just the single search box?
Yeah, well, in Sierra, you couldn't do anything but in index searching. So yes, we search by subject, which you still can, but I don't do that much subject searching. Do you?
Well, sure. On the reference desk, you do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Because it seems like it's just a keyword search to appear everything.
Well, it is, but I mean, if you see, here's the thing where if you're a librarian and you do things in a certain way and you know what the subjects are and you can just type them in by memory, then that works for you. But you're not someone that's coming to use the catalog as not a librarian and is starting out with just a question. And so maybe your question is just a bunch of keywords that you throw into the search box. And so you do that, and then you look at your results, and then you can find some subjects that you can click on from there, or you can find some facets on the left that you can click on. So I, in fact, explain searching that way when I'm on the reference desk. I'm like, throw some words in the box and see what you get, and then work from what you find, and then you can go deeper.
Because when you put the keywords in and the records come up, then you look at a book that's good, and the subjects are highlighted at the bottom, so you can just click on them from there. But you absolutely could. There is an advanced search, which I rarely use, but it does have subject. You could search subjects there, or you could put in, if you know the mark tags, you could say 650 or 651 or 610 or 600.
You could just type subject.
Or you could type subject :
It's very flexible, and
Yeah.
you can either use it not knowing anything about it or use it knowing a whole lot about it. And we've gotten into a great discussion and gone over time, and I'm sorry. It's it's 1:45, and I'm not sure what happens next, but we get a break. I should give you a break. Thank you for coming.